Well, now it is. Okay.
In almost one movement, very freed, we go from the aerial to the subterranean, exploring the four elements, earth, air, fire, and water, in a kind of very condensed and cinematographical meditation about the relationships between nature and industrial civilization, maybe with a pessimistic twist that refers to the very present situation we are currently living, because we end in a lockdown, as maybe locked down in a tunnel. This future tracks, Traces du Futur, we decided to screen to open this masterclass, was a command that many filmmakers who had a link with Vision du Réel decided to respond in 2014 for the 45th anniversary of the festival, a place where Peter Mettler received the main award in 2002 with one of these masterpieces, Gambling, Gods, and LSD, when Jean Perret, with whom I will have the pleasure to moderate this masterclass today, was the current director of that festival, which was renamed Vision du Réel at that time. But first of all, I would like to address a special thanks to all the people, very talented people that have been striving and working hard for the previous weeks to enable that the festival finally take place in that very peculiar form this year. Especially big up for our geek technical team that will broadcast this masterclass. I mean Hélène Gandard, Titouan Menot, our really beloved head of program, Aurélien Marseille, and Astrid Silva, who will raise the questions of the audience during the discussion. And in Toronto, a special hello also to Jordan Kawai. You won't see him on the screen, but he will be the cameraman who will stage Peter during the masterclass and this evening during his live show. So people were very welcome, very happy to welcome on board Peter Mettler in his second home country, in quotes, I would say, Switzerland. Peter is this very important filmmaker, raised between two cultures, born in Toronto from Swiss parents. Peter, I will open the masterclass with a question or a remark. You said once that you are constantly shifted between those two cultures I mentioned a few minutes before, the European one with your parents and the North American one in which you were raised, where you learned the skills that made you become a filmmaker today. What do you think of that strange situation we are currently living in right now? You are here with us in your home, in your apartment in Toronto, speaking through a device with Switzerland, in quotes. Do you think that the gift, so if I might say so, the gift of ubiquity is useful when you want to become a filmmaker?
Well, hello, first of all, hi. The gift of ubiquity, that's a nice way to put it. I'm not so sure I like it, to be honest. I find that more and more the technologies that we use as filmmakers have the potential to displace us from being in the place that we are. And as magical and amazing as it is to be talking to you through this portal and seeing you and Jean at the same time and talking to lots of people out in the world, I think it just, it's maybe interesting and fun for a little while, but it's not the life that I want to live.
You mentioned a couple of years ago that you hated more and more to fly, to be in a aircraft. is a feeling, but we are going to speak about bodies, feeling body, filmed bodies. But what about your body? You don't like to have your body in a box flying around, even though you fly many times around the world.
Yeah, I think you're addressing something that's right in the center of the paradox of my relationship to making films. Um, on the one hand, I embrace this amazing technology that allows us to see more deeply into our environment, that allows science and astronomy, all kinds of further explorations because of the technologies of seeing and hearing and reading detail. And that's also an exploration of inner worlds, of expression, of dreams. And it's fantastic. It's a fantastic extension of our experience and exploration. But at the same time, it's a separating mechanism from that real world, and it's a fine balance. It's a fine kind of dance to be going in and out of those realms. So, yeah, as much as it's incredible to be able to fly to another culture and immerse yourself, you also have to question it. Is it too much? Is it taking us out of the present where we live and the appreciation of the very things that are around us? Is it distracting us too much? And I think you can say that about media and film in general.
Before watching the first sequence of Gambling Gods, do you need to rewatch your films, to be in discussion with us, to make remarks about what you have done? Is it important for you to rediscover somehow, maybe, the body of your work?
Occasionally. It's not something I want to spend weeks and weeks on, but I mean, through instances like this, or through teaching, I sometimes am forced to re-expose myself and actually re-articulate what it was that I was trying to do, or try to remember what I was trying to do, and that can often be useful in terms of finding your next steps. But I think I'm always most interested in the next steps, what I'm doing now, what we can do differently, because of course it's new and it's exploratory. But references backwards occasionally are also useful, and of course it's very interesting to see how older films like Picture of Light, made in the early '90s, works today in a new context where awareness of recorded imagery, the dialogue around our relationship to nature has changed dramatically since the time that the film was made. So it's interesting to see it in new cultural contexts.
So we decided, the three of us, to show during this conversation quite long excerpts of films. For long, what does that mean? But we begin to really jump in your work with the 17 minutes long excerpt of Gambling Gods and LSD.
watching, but you're participating. When you dream, if you've ever had the experience when you dream, where you feel like I'm experiencing this, but I'm also standing back and watching it. It's much like that feeling.
Like there's nothing more cathartic than having an experience for me and then being able to identify it outside of myself.
When I was a child, a lot of times when you're in the waking state or dropping off to sleep, you experience more or less the falling feeling, which I
every
think
night
is
before
natural.
I go to bed, I pray to God, and I ask myself whether if I were to die right now, would I kind of regret anything, or would I feel like I'd missed something? And usually the answer is I could die right now, I'd be all right.
Well, I have a recurring dream about being on airplanes, but that's not what you were thinking about. No.
But here you can kind of get an idea of what a roundabout idea of what people really want.
But I don't ever feel content.
But it didn't turn out to be the way I thought it was going to be.
It's basically all the same thing. They want to.
It's more like that kind of thing.
They want that.
When you feel
that anticipation is more than anything. It's what.
Absolute hopelessness. And I find that comes up in my dream state.
My dreams are mostly dead silent. The only times when there's noise in my dreams, it's when something around me while I'm sleeping is kind of sinking in. Like one time,
my earliest memory. Birthday party, about 3 years old. It was the next door neighbor boy was sitting at the table, and down the street little girl, and my mom was putting a hat on my head saying, "It's your birthday." I really want to be in a place where love can exist over hate. I don't want to be in duality. You know, I want to be in love, and it's not here. because I no longer have to be here. I have forgiven myself, I've forgiven my family, I've forgiven everybody in my past. I know what it is to forgive. And my soul wants to leave, to be with God, you know, in His world, rather than Him having to be in your world of duality. I just don't see where it makes sense to lose your ego or to be enlightened. I think enlightenment is definitely for when you die. It's a search we all go on, but it's a tightrope. And once you get there, if you fall off that tightrope, you go through a very big struggle, mentally, physically. I mean, I've done things that were out of this world. I have felt Christ's scars, open wounds. They didn't hurt, but they were like air. And they, like, on my palms, my hand just kind of opened up, and I just laid there, and I knew exactly what it was. I knew that I was feeling Christ's scar. But it just happened one night when I was watching TV. I wasn't meditating, you know, I didn't know how to deal with it. Christ came to me in my loft in Atlanta, Georgia. And He came and He sat on a throne and He told me to open my eyes and keep my eyes open for a very long time. And I did this, and I don't know what the time span was. He's got long hair, he's got the beard, but he's wearing sunglasses. It's really funny. And when I ask him a question, he says, he goes with his head yes or no.
What does the voice of Christ sound like?
What you would imagine. Very soothing, very, you know, those voices on documentaries for PBS, nature voice, that type of voice. I have no regrets, really, because to be totally enlightened, you can't have any regrets. That's not in the program.
But on the one hand, you're saying enlightenment is good, that you don't have any regrets, but at the same time you wish it hadn't happened.
Well, I wish I hadn't fallen off the tightrope. Enlightenment is a very tight rope. It's like a fine line between heaven and earth. And I spend a lot of time in heaven, but I'm on earth. And I do things that people in heaven do. And I would like to be able to be in heaven, to experience all these things, and to know what I know, to be there. It's very hard being me because nobody believes me. You know, oh yeah, sure, you see God. You know, or yeah, you're crazy. See, nobody believes my journey. You know, a Dalai Lama, yeah, they believe a Dalai Lama, but I'm not a Dalai Lama. So I'm not taken seriously.
Is there anything that you're afraid of?
I'm afraid that the psychiatrists are right, that I'm nuts, that I made it all up in my head.
Have you ever had the feeling of flying with your own body?
No. In my dream body, but not in my body.
Have you ever died in your dreams?
Yes, I've died several times in my dreams, going off cliffs in the car and falling out of windows and falling. I don't get to the end, but I always know it's death. I said, oh, here it comes. And it's real easy in my dreams. It's real hard in life.
Test. We read you. Thank you. Gentlemen, we pray for a safe job. We thank you for all you have given us, and we'll give you the credit. Amen. I would like you to go ahead and warm up the blasting machine and tell me when you're in the red. Okay, I'm ready. That looks absolutely terrific. No fly in this direction that I can see at all. I saw no fly on up here. Terrific. The low ride sucked up a lot of that dust. Tim, wait till you see the video of 13. Awesome, absolutely awesome. Well, rewind now. You're going to be able to go over there and take a look at it in their traffic. Just tell me when you're
Take a deep breath. Tell me about the nightmare you must have had last night. Take a deep breath. Tell me about the nightmare you must have had last night.
So we're back in the live discussion with Peter Mettler and Jean Perret. And just before going ahead, I would just like to remind the audience that you can put your questions you want to ask to Peter Mettler, whether you follow the masterclass on the Vision du Réel forum page or whether also on the Facebook stream. So let's go back with Jean Perret, with Peter Mettler also.
Peter Mettler, what a piece of cinema. I've seen this success for many times. It's every time it's a new emotion and interest for the way you're telling this story, these stories. And maybe just to begin, you came from Toronto, where the film begins, Gambling Gods and LSD, going to United States, Las Vegas, and then Switzerland, and then India. A big journey, and it's a journey also in your life, because your life is made out of your daily life and of the daily life of cinema. And this film took about 10 years of your life to be conceived and to be achieved. Why did you need, small question, to reverse the jumping couple in the beginning? Why did you decide to reverse your pictures, for instance?
Yeah, that's a very detailed question from 20 years ago. But I think, many of the things that are done in the films, which you could call a technique or a decision to alter how we perceive something, are really about that. They're about recontextualizing things that we're used to seeing. And I mean, in the case of the bungee jumping couple, well, first of all, it's absurd. It's Las Vegas. They're getting married and jumping off a platform, bound together. This is the way that they celebrate their love, which is kind of a fantastic American way of doing things. But then the film kind of keeps looking after that sensational moment. It continues to look at something that's past the glory moment, if you will. It's past the sensational moment, where they're just hanging there and they're waiting to be pulled back into normal life, non-bungee jumping life. And when we flipped the image, we realized here's this wedding couple. It's like they're standing together, except all their hair and everything is going up in the air. And it's like, it's sort of I don't know, it's maybe a reference to the, the wedding photo of the couple posing, except it's so absurd because they're upside down, anti-gravity, with their hair standing on end. And the groom is kind of reaching out. He's licking his fingers because he's going to grab the rope that's going to pull them into the future. So it's this very poignant portrait of a couple deciding to be together and stepping into the future. So all those things I felt were being evoked by this kind of trick of turning something upside down.
And to be able to tell what you're saying right now, you have this other trick, which is the slow motion.
Yeah, altered time also allows you to look at things out of your regular perceptual framework. Yeah.
You're arriving in Las Vegas. What is going on in your methods of working? How did you decide to explore this hotel, to film this blasting of the hotel, this couple, this woman, this saint woman who received God in her heart? How do you organize your journey in this Las Vegas?
So, I mean, referencing the whole approach to Gambling Gods, it was one where I had done a number of years worth of research, but had ultimately decided that I wasn't going to film any of the things that I researched. That the research was more a kind of tuning around ideas and the kind of things that I would like to look for while I was traveling in 4 different cultures, one of them being Las Vegas, the United States.
I interrupt you. In this case, how long do you research, and how do you research? Reading books, going on internet, traveling around? What's your methodology?
Well, this was pre-internet, more or less. So I had like big books of cuttings and of writings and of typings that were organized according to place. And I basically boiled down 4 themes that would be my focal points. I call them filters, that I would use when I was exploring particular culture. If I would see something that would relate to one of these themes, then it would be something that I would consider filming. So, for example, they're very big themes: transcendence, the illusion of safety, our relationship to nature, and the denial of death. So these were like filters. So if I go into Las Vegas, I would look for things that tied into those filters. So, for example, Ava, the woman who we saw in the excerpt, was not someone I knew about before I got to Las Vegas. It was really someone who was introduced to me as a matter of course. Like one person led me to another kind of thing. In terms of the implosion, the building that's being blown up, that was one of the things I had been interested in ahead of time. And I'd actually contacted the family who goes around blowing up buildings around the world, who you could make a whole film on their own. They're fantastic, 3 generations. And the youngest generation, it's a woman who's running the demolition show. So anyway, I already had an engagement with them, and then when I was in Las Vegas, I saw that the Aladdin Hotel was being its contents were up for sale, and I basically snuck in because you're not allowed to film. I snuck in with a camera and filmed all these empty spaces, which you see in the excerpt we just saw. And I booked a room a month in advance of a hotel that was across the street from this hotel that was going to be imploded, because I thought that'll be the best place to be when they destroy this. In the meantime, I met what you see appears as a violin lady, is Justine, who is a person I met along the way, who actually has that tattooed on her back, the F-holes of a violin.
It's a very Man Ray icon.
Yes, although it wasn't my intention to quote Man Ray. It was really just, this is a person I met and she has a tattoo.
What a casting! How long do you make this casting to find this woman with tattoos?
Well, that's the beauty of working this way, because the things you encounter are much more fantastical than the things you can dream up or research when you're not out there in the world. So she was a character, and I did a whole interview with her. You hear a little bit of her talking about dreams at the beginning of the sequence we just watched. And I also did a lot of filming with the family that did the implosion. And at the time I thought, I'm going to actually force a crossing of these 2 subjects, which is one of the only times I did that in this Gambling Gods process, to force an image like that, which is kind of staged because there's 2 cameras. I hired someone to film Justine in the bedroom, and I was down on the ground as the implosion was taking place. Anyhow, long story, both those stories got taken out of the final edit, and all you have is the moment of the implosion and Justine in the bed with the violin holes on her back. But that shows you how those things came to be. Following different pathways and relationships, and covering these things, and then in the edit process, sculpting it together and weaving it together.
how do you film this person who is believing in God, who met God? It seems to have two cameras, two kind of pictures, two voices. So how do you work in this kind of circumstance? How do you decide to make out of a normal daily interview a kind of spectacle of her and of her meeting you and who you meeting her?
Well, it's that situation filming Ava. You would get in a lot of trouble in film school for shooting something the way I shot that. Basically, what I was doing, because we were still shooting film at that time, 16 millimeter, super 16 millimeter film. Film is very expensive, and I can't roll the camera all the time. So one of the ways I would cover things is I would have the film camera, and I would turn the film camera on when I thought, oh, this is something really good, or I was anticipating something that was going to come up. So that was me on the camera. Then, because I was traveling alone, I didn't actually have a crew. I would ask people that I met to hold the video camera and film with the video camera at the same time. And this was an early incarnation of a mini DV camera. So in the case of Ava, you have this bizarre situation where there's two cameras, each looking from a different perspective, recording a very different type of image. The quality of the image is different. And sound, of course, being recorded for both of them. And on top of that, sometimes I'm asking the question, and sometimes my friend with the video camera is asking the question. So the eye lines are jumping around. It made it a very difficult scene to edit in traditional terms, but it posed its own kind of rules because of the way it had been shot. And I think it became an interesting scene in part because of that, because of the way that the line of thinking is going and where her eye line is going and who she's talking to, and suddenly you hear my voice from over here and then you hear it from over there. And I think it adds to the general disposition, let's say, of the character who we're getting to know.
Peter, when we see the building of that sequence shot in Las Vegas, we might think that we are currently or in the heart of one of the filter you quoted a few minutes ago, that is to say the illusion of safety, centered in Vegas and in Nevada, but we can also, and that brings us back to the title of that part of the masterclass called Default Mode Off. We can see three layers, or at most three layers in that sequence. There's, of course, the name of your character, Eva, who met God on television and something like that. So it refers to a very archaic imaginary of the Christian culture. There is also that conversation about dreams, Justine, which can somehow deals with that question of dreams, of onanism, and something very basic of people gathering to see an auto blasting. But there is also maybe an unconscious layer, because you ended the editing of Gambling Gods and LSD in a very specific period. I mean September 2011. And looking back today, that sequence, in particular of gambling, do you had subconsciously the impression to talk in a very oblique way of what was going on in North America? I mean also the Requiem pictures of planes not crashing, but
flying
in the sky, like, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Could you tell us how you built a sequence with those different layers of meaning?
Yeah. Okay. Well, so first of all, the sequence that you saw begins in the desert, and we see, amongst other things, we see this civilization that's built into the desert, which is Las Vegas. And the end of the sequence, if you were to continue watching the film, ends at a poker table where a group of friends is gathering, and they have been celebrating the passing of the man's wife, Jose's wife, and unexpectedly he brings the bones, the remains of his wife, and puts them on the poker table. And he's kind of holding them, and they're like, fragments of bones of dust. And so the kind of unconscious logic of that whole sequence of Las Vegas was about impermanence. It's never spoken about, but the way that the whole visitation in a way is shaped is this idea that, well, everything comes from dust, manifests into what it manifests and goes back to dust. So the whole journey there in Vegas is unconsciously shaped around that potential for annihilation, if you will, and for rebirth. In terms of 9/11, it was very strange because yes, there's a lot of airplanes, and there was not a really intellectual reason for doing that. It was just that they're everywhere and they're bringing me everywhere, and I felt that they changed our relationship to the planet dramatically in all sorts of ways, and their presence needed to be acknowledged. And there's a strange story about me wanting to know when this film was finished. And because you could continue editing a film like this, you could go through it over and over and change things. It's really a kind of, it's a constellation of associations that could shift that way, could shift that way. And I was asking myself, how do I know this film is finished? And I referenced in my memory John Paul Young, who you see at the beginning of the film, and how he asked me to ask God to make an appearance. And I said to him, well, that's not really how I think or how I would go about it, but maybe somehow making this film is a similar process, And so I was thinking of him, and I said, okay, so something should give me a sign. And strangely, the film seemed to be finished. I was looking at it in terms of reels in the editing system, where the reel breaks would be. And I made a little adjustment to a Muslim man praying on a roof, and the camera goes up to a 747 that's flying overhead in the same shot. I made a little edit there, and then the phone rang, and it was my friend telling me what was happening in New York with 9/11, that the planes had just crashed into the towers. And I was like, oh, that's a very poignant, pertinent sign that's related right to the footage I just touched. And that, of course, I think is the case for many artists working at the time, was a moment that made you reflect upon everything you'd been doing in a new way. And looking back at Gambling Gods, which I did immediately that night, I saw embedded in a way in its unconscious all these signs that pertained to what had happened on that day of 9/11. And I think it's really one of the interesting things about doing this kind of filmmaking that is observatory and exploratory and open for discovery is that you're actually sensing things that you're not even aware of intellectually, that you're catching things that have a logic beyond our own capacity to process them in the present, if you will. And I think another factor of that's interesting is if you keep things chronological, there's a logic that corresponds to the unfolding of experience that unfolds as only linear time unfolding can allow. And Gambling Gods, that was one of the only rules as well, is that film would remain chronological throughout.
We receive many very good, interesting, articulated questions, Peter, and one is coming of Maria Elisa Scheidt from Munich, and she asked, what are your technique for the, I would say, interviews, but conversation you have with different characters? Do you have a rehearsal? Do you know everything about the characters before beginning to speak with them? Do you have very long conversation in order to have at least 1 or 2 minutes in the film? How do you work with this in these encounters?
Yeah, it's very different each time. Because I do my own camera, sometimes I like to be working with someone else, in fact, who becomes the person of engagement in the conversation. I mean, that's one way of doing it. So that we go into a situation, and my filmmaking partner is actually engaging, so that I can be observing and step in when I want to with a question or with an engagement. But I'm not felt to be forced to be the conduit of the relationship the whole time. But there's other times where I'm just alone with a person and the camera's running and we have a conversation, and there's no agenda. And or let's say the agenda is it's not in the form of a list of questions on a piece of paper. It's more a sense of what this person's feelings about a specific idea might be, and I would like to hear about it. So we start a conversation and it goes in that direction, and then at some point that comes out. In other times it's complete random chance. The camera's running, somebody comes up to you, or you climb into a car and you're with somebody and the camera's running, and it's like a jazz improv, you know. It's hello, who are you and what do you have to say? And this is me, and it's an engagement, and the camera's running, and you don't know where it's going to go. So there's no kind of system or steadfast rule to say what's the best way to encounter somebody with a camera.
When you meet this person, she might sound ridiculous, but she doesn't. So you pay attention to her, you respect her, you have this ethical approach of her that she's a real character, and at the same time, you make out of her, because of your filming and your editing, a very different person, different approach, at least for us spectators. You're never satisfied by the first layer of something, of a reality of a person. You always, in the shooting and then in the editing, you try to figure out something different, something deeper, something more complex.
Yeah. Yeah. Is that a question?
It is a remark. Go ahead. But about never being satisfied by what is going on the first layer. You're always grabbing, searching for something else in the time of the filming at the beginning.
Well, I think what makes different people tick, and what makes people say the things they say is very complex and revealing over time. I mean, the more you talk, the more things are revealed. And as you well know yourself, as an interviewer or a conversationalist, often the best time to the most poignant things sometimes come when the interview's finished. That you've had this sense of formality, and there's a feeling, okay, that's over now. Those questions, and then immediately, the person starts talking about what they really care about. And it's like you go into the next phase of the conversation, the next phase of the interview, which often is more dynamic and vivacious than the first part was. But it's like all reviewing of film material. It's always interesting, the difference between what you're recording in the moment and what you think is happening in the moment of recording. And then you get to editing, and you start to examine this footage, and you see the nuances and the more subterranean things that are at work in terms of communication and body language, and even the sound that's going on off screen, things that people are responding to. And you start to work with that, of course, and you start to work with contextualizing this encounter in a bigger body of expression, which is the film that you're working on. And another thing, just going back to the interview process, which I think is simple but very profound, is the difference of a microphone that's on a body, that's intimately listening, sometimes even to heartbeat, or to somebody swallowing their food, hearing that versus the microphone that is hearing at a distance from the perspective that we may be looking at something like the microphone over there. And I find using those two elements at the same time is very powerful, because it brings this kind of intimacy. It's almost like it takes you into the body of the protagonist, because the sound becomes so intimate.
One of your favorite expression of words is default mode off, but especially the off with 2, 3, 4, 5 F. So could you, in a few words before we're watching the next excerpts, to explain a little bit what you mean because of this default mode off, to be outside of the expected situations we know?
Yeah, I mean, default mode off comes from, it was actually, I was driving back from America with a filmmaker, Samara Chadwick, and we were thinking of a way to organize some systems of filmmaking, not like a manifesto, but that kind of direction, like things to pay attention to. And one of the kind of umbrella ideas is default mode off, which is something from neuroscience, which just the default mode is a system of brain function that is firing a certain way when we're dealing with our normal tasks, let's say. I mean, that's reducing it, simplifying it a lot, but it's basically a normal way of doing things. And what default mode off is trying to suggest with this long list that I prepared for the film school in Cuba is things to spark you in a different direction, that may open your perception in a different way, or that may shift your methodology in a way that you're not going to get expected formulaic things, but rather you're going to incite discoveries and new associations and new possibilities. So default mode off is kind of an umbrella for that kind of investigation, that kind of experience, which you can liken also to a drug experience, where the term is referenced in a book by Michael Pollan called How to Change Your Mind. So it's basically like rewiring that network in a way, rewiring your whole strategy and your system of filmmaking to catch something outside of the normal ways that we perceive, the normal ways that, or the traditional forms that we use to construct our films.
And that's why we are going to screen the third excerpt we choose for this masterclass. And you will see also, the audience will see also that it is a question of perception, because it's an excerpt from the end of time, and we will come back in a few minutes to talk about that specific project and to go on to go ahead through your work, Peter Mettler.
Our sun is less than halfway through its lifespan. It will not be humans who watch the sun's death 6 billion years from now. Astronomer Martin Rees points out, any creatures that then exist will be as different from us as we are from bacteria today. When Joe Kittinger jumped to Earth in the pursuit of knowledge, he fell faster than the speed of sound. Yet with no point of reference, he thought he was suspended in space, as though time had stopped. light is still reaching us from the beginning of the universe. This moment travels through space towards some being of the future.
Yes.
Back in live. So we are back in this long conversation dealing with the impressive work of Peter Mettler. We choose that third excerpt from The End of Time, which is considered as your second travelogue or essay. The third one. The first one was Picture of Light, mid-90s, then Gambling, Gods, and LSD, we talked about before, and then The End of Time. And we've chosen this specific excerpt because it's the weirdest part of this essay of The End of Time, and this film was impossible to make, and I would ask my very first question about the process that leads you to achieve the end of time is connecting with your relationships with the environment and the industrial filmmaking culture that often demands that you present things in script forms in order to raise money. And you said, I don't remember well where, that the risk is that cinema becomes a derivative of your written words. And you added that the reason why I don't write a script is based on a hope that I have, and still have, I guess you still have, that the things you will discover along the way will be more interesting than the one you had imagined during the preparation. This was the case with The End of Time. Was it difficult to convince people to support you through that project, almost impossible to achieve? I mean, filming time is just talking about cinema, and everything where you point your camera is dealing with that question, which is very universal and very intimate. And I would like also to know, with that question of raising money, what is the connection between you, your personal life, and that universal questioning?
Okay, that last part of the question, you'll have to ask me that one again.
Yeah, of course.
Because that was kind of a tangent.
It's also the question raising from coming from the audience. So,
okay.
I try to make a mix.
Okay, I see. Well, I mean, I can just briefly say that, early on I was confronted with the difficulty of making proposals for films that are essentially a kind of exploratory process. As you mentioned, and as we talked about earlier, I think there's great value in discovering things that are out there in the world that are completely unexpected. We mentioned the Justine with the tattoo on her back. That's not something you invent. That's something you or I discovered. But in writing proposals, it's quite difficult because people want to have a clear picture of what they're going to get, what they're putting money into. So I found the best way to deal with this was to create an image of what the film could be, to create an impression of what the film could be, even going as far as describing scenes that are artificial, that are not actually going to be filmed, but to state that in the proposal. This is the logic of the film that that we're going to make, and here's an example of how it could look, but this is just an example. It's not the actual thing. So on the one hand, creating an image of what it might be like, and on the other, outlining a strategy, where you try to describe the actual themes that you're looking for and the methodology, like what kind of actual physical engagements are you going to partake in terms of I'm going to X place for a number of weeks to sit with this one particular family or whatever it is. That you have a plan, that there is a system, and that there is some kind of budget associated with that. It's basically like setting up a studio and a band ready to improvise. The members of the band know what they're doing. They have great schooling. They know how to perform prepared pieces, but you're trying to create an environment that nurtures an interaction for discovery and response. So the proposals more and more became like that, like talking about strategy and themes. And luckily I was, given the opportunity fairly early on to make Picture of Light, which was a very open process. We didn't know what that film would be until that film was finished. And I learned a lot about working in an open, exploratory way by making that film, and could use it, could show it to potential new investors on new projects. Look, this was made in this way. So Gambling Gods was made in that way. End of Time was made in that way. End of Time is a bit of a peculiar film because it actually started as a film about clouds, as about meteorology. That was one of my main focuses. And what happened in the development of researching clouds, first of all, a sub-film came out of it, which was Petropolis, which is an examination of the Alberta tar sands, one of the world's largest oil extraction sites. That came out of a research process. But as I pursued clouds and meteorology, it became a film about observing change. And then observing change, obviously, is something that we do as a species, and we call that time. And suddenly I found myself in this impossible subject called time, which a lot of people are interested in, but everybody has talked about, and it's, it covers all of art, all of science. There's so many things that time has been, so many contexts in which time has been discussed or expressed. And here I am doing it again as well, and felt quite a strong weight because of that. Yet at the same time, it focused the film in a certain way for people to get on board with, if you will. And it still remains like if I see online people responding for films to look at it, they always seem to go to The End of Time because it's catchy. And it's amazing what that subject of time draws in. But that said, sorry, I'm kind of rambling. I'll try and wrap it up. That said, time, the film is very personal, and it encounters very specific people I met along the way, exploring this big idea, but in a very personal way. And it includes, to a great degree, this idea that film is a time medium. It is, as Tarkovsky called it, sculpting in time, and that the very experience of watching the film that you're watching is a process of contemplating what it means to be, what it means to be in time. And the film really could have been called The Time Being.
Yeah, all the time are changing because we have the impression that there is a tension during the the shooting and the editing and the film between something that I would call a collective. You begin with shooting with the physicist of the CERN, which is a collective of scientists, and then when we are going through from the invisible, that is to say the collider, what's going on inside the collider, through something which is very impressive and spectacular. I mean the lava and the volcano, and that very Conradian character living in that island of Hawaii, surrounded by the eruption of the volcano. And there are very impressive and strong sequences about that loneliness, surrounded by the fire of nature. And afterwards, we go to Detroit, and then you mean other collectives with Plastic Man, with DG, and the collective of people who are trying to go over the automobile crisis that collapsed on the economy of the city. And then you seem to make a free replay of what was going on in that sequence we screened, which is very abstract and combine also what was all the rolling process during the movie, and we jumped, if I remember well, with a conversation very intimate with your mother, and the conversation of a mother and a son, and you find again the link at the end, not at the end of the time, but at the end of the movie.
Well, yeah, the sequence that we just watched. Sometimes I think of it as a kind of film of the future, in the sense that it compresses recorded material to such an intense degree, and it layers recorded material, mostly in this case of the film you just saw, as a way that I think is a reflection of how we are actually taking in images and layering them to more and more extreme degrees, to the process that we can actually mix those images together and follow their course independently, as opposed to just seeing the old, theatrical presentation of actors on stages in frames. It's very evolving, and it's evolving like music has evolved beforehand. Anyhow, the sequence ends up with my mother, as you say, and I really just filmed that sequence by accident on Mother's Day when I went home with my camera and was showing my mom and dad the camera and filming her at the same time. But then when I saw that, came across it in editing, I was really struck by the simplicity and the love in that situation where, it's my mom sitting at a table and just talking about time in the most simple and obvious human way. Plus the fact that she's my mother and that she's I was brought to the earth by her, and that's one of the most endearing relationships of time is the generations that came before you, your ancestors. So bringing it back to simplicity, basically.
Mm.
One of the questions we received concerns the sound design. And in this film, like in all your films, you pay a lot of attention to the sound design. Could you explain, because we speak about layers of the pictures, of the images, and beside, under the pictures, we have the layers of the sound, the sounds.
Yeah, maybe we can just give you the question of Nina Fernandez, who say that I'm fascinated by the soundscapes of your films as they have a powerful immersive and haptic effect. I would like to know how you incorporate the work on sound in your filmmaking practice. Is it already an element that comes into play in the earlier stages of research and filming, or is it mostly experimented with and added only later in post-production? I'm asking because I often have the impression in your films that images follow and embody sound rather than the contrary. And this is a question that is coming often in the ones we are receiving on the different canals.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's right to say sound and music and voice and ambient sound, all of those things are very important to the totality of the film. And that work begins with filming already, you know, as we're out in the world. I'm collecting music that I hear that's relevant to the emotions or to the place that I'm experiencing. Also recording ambiences, noticing the difference. Like even these days, the ambience around this house here is very different because of the silences incurred by the COVID. So, you know, sound is always telling a story one way or another. And I would agree, it's often more, sound can be more evocative than image because it's invisible, it's suggestive, and it enters us in a different way. So all the time during production, sounds are being collected, and then in the editing process, already at the stage of assembly, we'll be using those sound elements and musical elements already as we're assembling visuals. And from that point on, everything is cut together. So as the visual edit is happening, so is the sound edit, so is the spoken word edit, whether it's my voiceover or a character voiceover. All those things are happening at the same time because I really feel that they are one thing. You know, they are all informing each other. And often the sound already, like in the environment shooting with the camera, if there's birds, if there's a car passing, if there's sirens, an airplane going, that actually can affect the movement of the camera. You know, if I'm hearing that's a kind of impulse that helps how the camera is guided. And similarly in editing, you know, sometimes it's a piece of music that is taking the lead, and the pictures are going into that, and then sometimes it's the other way around, that the pictures are dominating and the ambiences are supporting it. Whatever the case, they're always working together.
And you're looking in all your films, and the ones we are going to discover now, kind of beating, a deep beating, a sound beating, like a beating heart of you filming, editing, and like the beating heart of the film itself.
Yeah.
You're also a musician.
I mean, they're compositions for sure. The you know, as much as they may have a thesis or they may have a narrative, probably the thing I enjoy the most or I'm compelled to find joy in is the composition, is the sort of experience of going through this this piece of cinema, and of course I also like to have the films working in a room in a cinema where the sound envelops you and where the picture is big enough that it, you know, draws you in even more as an experience. And I did come out of, as a youngster, I came out of piano training into film making when I was a teenager still. So the influence of playing the piano, I think, it was quite big on my interests in film.
And it is the reason why when we watch your films, we have very often the feeling that there is overlappings very fluidly and skillfully edited in what you call oral and visual composition. You don't like cuts when you edit your movies. This is a very evolutive form with no syncope, I would say, in the musician language.
No syncope?
Yeah, no cut, no stop. There is something just evolving very smoothly.
Yeah, I think it depends. I do like cuts and abrupt changes too. But I think what you're referring to is our transitions that I especially do like, how one thing evolves into another, flows into another.
Yeah.
And sometimes it can go for a very long time before you come to a moment where there is a distinct shift, a hard cut. But when those hard cuts come, they're quite they're radical in their own right. They're quite they can be quite extreme. So I don't think it's that I don't like them, but I think the transitions definitely are something I'm taken by regularly. Yeah.
Peter, you said at the beginning you're not sure to fly anymore that often that before, but for Petropolis you had to fly, and we're going to discover 5 minutes of this film Petropolis you mentioned before. It's about this tar sands, this in Alberta, Canada region where oil is captured in the soil. So we're going to see 5 minutes of Petropolis.
Okay.
In the year we call 1783, two brothers named Montgolfier flew the first passengers suspended in a hot air balloon, a sheep, a rooster, and a duck. The flight, which lasted 8 minutes, took place in front of Louis XVI, Marie Antoinette and the French court, as well as a crowd of about 130,000 spectators. The balloon flew nearly 2 miles before returning its occupants safely to Earth. Today, in the summer of 2008, we fly a machine powered by the combustion of petroleum. Again, we are presented with a new perspective of a landscape we cannot comprehend from the ground. During the mid-20th century, in the forest that used to stand here, a chemist named Karl Clark spent much of his life trying to figure out how to separate bitumen from sand. It took him nearly 45 years, but he eventually perfected a hot water process using his wife's washing machine. In 1965, Clark got to see the first commercial application of his invention. Creating the mine to feed his process required the slashing and burning of thousands of trees. Clark was disturbed by the realization that he had spent most of his life making this kind of destruction possible. Before he died of cancer in December 1966, he told his daughter Mary that he could never revisit this place. What we have seen here below shows only 3% of the potential tar sands development carried out since the days of Carl Clark. The expected life of the sun is another 15 billion years. We have made ingenious use of petroleum for 80. What will we do next?
Like,
Peter, is it a dream, a kind of fantasy of a filmmaker to film from the sky, to become kind of God, having this view on the earth from above?
No. No, I don't think so. But I think it's interesting, the idea of that perspective on the Earth. I mean, it's something that we as a species have actually physically not been able to do very long. You know, it's referenced in that clip that it was done first by balloonists. You know, so the first time that a physical human body was up in the air was in one of these balloons looking down that gave us this perspective. But it's interesting in other traditions like Aboriginal Australia, where their history and their stories are illustrated on the ground as aerial views, and it's also in shamanistic practices references to seeing that perspective. So perhaps we've traveled there in other ways, if only in our minds, but it's only recently that technically we've been able to look at that perspective. In the case of Petropolis, it was completely because of security reasons. So it was an aesthetic that was generated by our inability on the ground to be able to film anything. As soon as we appeared with a camera, security would remove us. And ironically, the only legal place we could be was up in the air 1,000 feet looking down. So that actually gave us this this perspective, and also an understanding of how the lay of the land worked. It was actually kind of a gift because it showed us the relationships of the different factories to the edges of the forests and this huge expanse that this industry was occupying.
So it was a constraint that you made a very impressive advantage to take the whole picture and make the viewer have a conscience of what was going on. You could not have the same outcome on the soil, I think. And I would like also to hear you about the deal of the command between it was this movie was a command of Greenpeace Canada, and you twist it in one of your obsessive thought or way of practice. So that is to say, using technology to go deeper in the reality. And with that, also with that comment, your scarce comment on those pictures, which are not very journalistic, or not very informative, just giving awareness with in a sensitive way.
Yeah, I mean, I think I was very aware, and the film addresses the paradox of flying in a helicopter that is fueled by the petroleum that is actually the subject of the film that we're looking at from above, looking down on. So it's, you can criticize the use of petroleum if you want, but you're also using it to reflect upon our own condition, upon our own nature in that moment. So the film is kind of embodying the paradox of, okay, this is where we are at now, and the important thing is to look at our relationship with the earth and with our resources and how to move forward from there. In terms of the film being a commission, it wasn't really a commission. It was more a situation where someone from Greenpeace asked me to recommend a cinematographer for a project they were doing at the tar sands, and I volunteered because I wanted to research the tar sands for the End of Time film, which I mentioned before. I was interested in what was going up into the Earth's atmosphere, and the tar sands was a place ripe for exploration. So one thing led to another. We ended up going up in the air. I saw this incredible perspective, and we organized, quite sophisticated camera mounting system on a helicopter to be able to really see clearly from above what is there. And when I saw that footage for the first time, I thought, oh, you could actually make quite a powerful film with just that footage. And I proposed to Greenpeace that I might make that in the way that I make films, if that would be of interest to them. Because it's not really the kind of film that they would usually make. They would make more factual and protest kind of films. This film is very observational, but they encouraged that, and I think it worked really well for them. It ended up getting a lot of play and festivals on television. It brought to a greater public an awareness of what this place was, the Alberta tar sands.
Yeah, because it was also playing in some activist networks, and it's really it's weird because that's not an activist movie.
Mm-hmm.
But it is a political movie. I mean, all your films have political, social backgrounds, but this one is explicit. But in a very specific way you mentioned, and you, as Emmanuel said as well, the way to film from above is really a fantastic way to embrace the catastrophe. But it's seldom to see a film embracing visually a catastrophe. We always say some aspects, some fragments, okay, it's working. But this case, we have this catastrophe coming from the nature and embracing this destruction of nature. You discovered this capacity of these pictures in flying in a helicopter.
Yeah, and in not making edits. That was a huge part of it. The camera operator. There's the camera operator, the helicopter pilot, and myself in the helicopter, and I had a monitor and was talking to both of them as we were flying. And my biggest instruction to the camera operator was, Ron Chappelle is his name, who's an expert at doing aerial photography, was to improvise, you know, like don't make edits, let one thing lead to the next, follow like you're playing an instrument, and let things be discovered, let things be unfold. And I could see what was coming, so I could tell him, okay, like if you keep your frame to the left, something will enter soon. And same with the helicopter pilot. It was like, okay, so let's bank the helicopter to the left at this point. So it was a really unusual three-person camera operation in the end that was recording this, all with the interest of not cutting, because it's the not cutting that gives you the sense of scope and relationships of things in the landscape. Whereas if you cut, you lose that.
Absolutely. And when and why did you decide to include in this observation your voice, a comment, a story, balloon?
Well, yeah. So I mean, voiceover is a whole other level of creativity in these films, and I make diaries as I go along, and sometimes those diaries become source material in the edits, and I will record things and try different edits with them. In the case of Petropolis, I was inspired by a book by Andrew Nikiforuk, and he'd written about the tar sands and the implications of oil, and I wrote and read all this stuff, and there's versions of Petropolis which are full of voiceover from beginning to end, talking about oil industry, etc. What that did was it helped me understand what the film was about, and then I took out all that voiceover at some point, and there was no voiceover at all. And we were in an editing process, and I had been growing my beard, which often happens during editing, and went to a party, and somebody said at the party, "Oh, you should leave though, like shave, but leave your sideburns like those balloonists, those pioneer balloonists." And I thought, oh, the balloonists, wow, yeah. As I mentioned before, they were the first person to physically go up in an air balloon and see the ground from above, and that inspired this whole kind of idea around the history of flight and the perspective of the Earth from above, and referencing the balloonists against what we were doing today with the helicopters. That voiceover was born. So these bits of voiceover come from everywhere. They come from different inspirations, even from not shaving and going to a party.
We're going to improve these questions of voiceover, text after watching Picture Flight, a short excerpt where you're speaking in. But it's interesting, by the way, Peter, to know that you're supposed to edit and you visit some parties, white parties in Toronto. Okay, it's a way to live. But
yeah, don't we all go to parties?
Sometimes. So let's go to the Picture Flight.
Okay.
Soon we'll be able to stand in a virtual world. One that we have created with wires and pulses. It will entertain us. It will keep us busy. We've come to the Arctic to capture a picture of light, lured by the miracle of nature. living in a time where things do not seem to exist if they are not captured as an image. But if you close your eyes, you may see the lights of your own retina. Not unlike the northern lights, not unlike the movements of thought. Like a shapeless accumulation of everything we will ever see.
Body flap and speed brake in launch condition. Sound suppression water system activated. T-minus 10, 9, 8, go for main engine start. 6, 5, main engine start. 3, 2, 1, and... Houston, Atlanta, send the roll. Roger, roll, Atlanta.
We're back.
Peter, we have been a couple of times together working. We have been in Cuba for a couple of weeks with young filmmakers, and I observed you. You're a writer. I mean, you pay really attention. You take time. You take time in your daily life and nights to write. And what you write, you gave me some of your writings. It's really written, de l'écriture. It's really writing. And you have notebooks, different ones, small ones in your pocket, bigger ones on your tables. So tell us more about how you have this interest, this need to film, to record sounds, and to write, but to engage this really gesture of writing. It's not just taking notes to go to shop. It's really a kind of interest, passion, talent of writing.
Yeah, it's a parallel activity with all the rest of it, really. As I'm making a film, or even when I'm not making a film, I'm keeping notes or keeping a diary. I have one very long document that goes on for years that I just keep adding to. Then I have other documents that are specific ideas, subjects, films. But the writing process is it's a parallel process to making images, to collecting sounds, to engaging with the world that's out there. It's a different part of perception. It's a different part of the brain, the words. And it helps me to put into my perception, into my experience, sentences of communication that I can then use later in the transmission of the film. So I will have notebooks, and I will compile excerpts from those notebooks, and then I will try recording pieces of those things as we're in the editing process. Often they're too obvious, but they help to understand where the film is going, what the film is about, or what a certain sequence might be meaning. And then I take them out again and maybe re-record something that will fit in a different way with what we're seeing. So it's this constant process of using that part of the brain, using that part of communication, the words, in tandem with experiential qualities of image and sound that cinema offer,
and including in the sound mixing your voice, because you are the one speaking the texts. That's obvious for you. You want to have your own voice, your tone, your way to spell the words.
Yeah, I mean, up to this point where there's a kind of honest relationship between myself as a protagonist and the journey that the film is on, yes, that makes sense. But I think there are other films, and there can be instances where it's not that anymore. You know, where it's a character, or where there's a greater degree of fiction than the fiction that I am. So it can change, but it's also practical, you know. If you,
it's less expensive.
If you record your own voice, it's a lot of shortcuts there, and you don't have to pay yourself.
And you find a good balance, because the rhythm of your voice speaking is coupled with the rhythm of the images. You find a perfect balance. It's not given. You have to work on it now.
Yeah, it's a pretty involved process, and I mean, one of the things I don't like about voice is that it attracts so much attention. You know, as soon as there's a voice speaking over something, the attention of the viewer goes to that voice. It becomes dominated by the meaning of those words, and I am actually more interested in the sensual things that come across, the relationships of image and sound, and sort of being immersed in an experience that is beyond the words. So I try to use words very gingerly, and not that they become the dominant form of communication. It still should be an experience that works viscerally when you're watching a film, I think.
Words, you in the accepts, things do not exist if not captured as an image. That's sensual. What could you make a comment about that? And does that mean that you know exactly when you're filming, but you know also when you're not filming, because it doesn't make sense, you don't need it?
Things do not seem to exist if they're not being captured as an image. I mean, that's a reference to the times that we live in, more than anything. I think that we're so guided by the images that we make and the images that we see, and the self-affirmations of taking our own pictures, of selfies, of pictures with other people. All this has been supporting our identity. Life was very different before we were able to make recordings of ourselves.
So you had these impressions already in the beginning of the 90s, because Jean is referring to one of your wording in A Picture of Light.
That's right.
That is also an essay, I would say, an essay, because like in other films in your filmography, there is always that intertwine or interweaving between the voice, the writing, the images, the sounds. And what is most striking in your use of the voiceover, we could maybe recall as a guy called Chris Marker could build his commentaries exactly the same way, scarce but very precise. And you are already in Picture of Light. You are writing an essay with sounds and images about what is cinema and what is taking pictures and what kind of reality the fact of taking picture creates. That's already a deep reflection about how you as a filmmaker you stand before the reality you are trying to catch, like the hunter, and you make a comparison between the indigenous people who are chasing the beasts and or hunting to eat, just in order to eat. And you, in one of the sequence of Picture of Light, you are just asking yourself, well, am I a modern hunter? But I'm chasing something that is not real, isn't real, does not exist. I make them exist through my camera and through my way of viewing.
Yeah. Sorry, I lost the question in that observation.
It wasn't a question. It was
okay.
a remark and something to fill in the conversation.
Right.
But about that question of do you feel that you are an essayistic filmmaker?
Sometimes, I think Picture of Light was really a contemplation around what it means to record images, and it questions our relationship to nature. How much do we understand the world by the images that we've seen versus real experience? And that became very clear in the making of that film. The profundity of being in an Arctic environment and seeing this incredible display given to you by the heavens. How profound that is, and how many people will never see that in their lifetime, but they may see it on a film, and how that relationship to the film is quite skewed, in fact, to reality, to the reality of being in a place like that.
Yeah, and you say in the very moment of Picture of Light, but I prefer to be here to experience it, whether with a camera or not, than to watch it on TV.
Yeah, and it's kind of a appeal caught in, and have been caught in for decades now, which is, on the one hand, using a medium to reflect upon our own very condition, our nature, the nature of perception in the time that we live in, versus just living in it, versus just being in nature. I use the tools of cinema as a process of self-reflection and what we are doing with nature and technology. But I would be also perfectly happy to step out of that and just be in the natural world without a film camera.
I don't believe you, but that's another question. We got the questions before at the beginning from Demelza Goij about you filming body, and I take this question and ask you how much you need to experience physically. For instance, the deep coldness in the north of Canada. You engage, you feel in your body, and to be somehow in danger with your body. You have been in south of India, you have been in north of Canada. You need this experience of your body confronted with this weathers.
Yeah, I think that's very interesting, because we have a tendency, let's say, as an audience of watching films, to be safe in our whatever living room, in our environment where we're having kind of surrogate experiences on the screen of what it's like to be in the Arctic or what it's like to be in the jungle. So I think it's interesting to go out into those real environments with a camera and be confronted with something that's uncomfortable and is radically different than the living room where you usually look at images in, and to, in a way, have to become more animal in your body while using this technology. Pardon me, to transmit an experience, if you will, and it's an interesting challenge because you don't want to just show something as being pretty or horrible, or you don't want to just transmit information. It would be nice if you could transfer some kind of experience, some kind of quality of the senses with the cinematic experience that you have when you're there with a camera, yeah.
And maybe we can screen right now, because we are in the heart of the matter, an excerpt from your last work called Becoming Animal, which was achieved in 2018. And we will come back for the discussion after that.
In engaging so many of our technologies, we are reflected back to ourselves. That is, the technologies intervene between our sensing bodies and the sensuous earth in such a way that we begin interacting with the technology and forgetting that there is a wider, more than just human world. And yet the technologies originate as tools helping us to make contact with or engage that wider than human world. Our organism is still yearning to feel what it's like to live in a world filled with intelligence. And so our way of trying to get there, to recreate that experience, involves outfitting digital interfaces into every built item of our world. Ubiquitous computing.
Imagine that you have 0 cookies and you split them evenly among 0 friends.
Natural language user interfaces programmed to talk back to us. does seem as though our technologies are just trying to mimic that ancient, oral, animistic cosmos we once inhabited.
flying and have almost forgotten to notice. As I sense the plane around me, has my body grown wings? We are carried carefully, miraculously through space by the very technology which risks eclipsing us from its source, relegating us to a purely human world. And I remembered that in the skeleton of this plane is the bird who taught us to fly.
Ladies and gentlemen, now that we're going, I'd like to say a little bit more about the flight today. As soon as we're able to get up, we'll be coming through the aisle offering beverages. A list of beverages can be found on the back page of the Hemisphere magazine, and other alcoholic beverages available for purchase. You can use a credit or debit card with a Masterclass.
Then we just saw an excerpt from your last movie, Becoming Animal, which was co-directed with Emma Davey, from whom we listened the voiceover in that excerpt. And in a way, Becoming Animal, you just go further and further in what you call the relationships of love and hate with technology, because with Becoming Animal, you are trying to create a dialogue, a trialogue, you say, between Emma, Davey, you, and this philosopher, David Brown, who has been thinking a lot about reshaping our relationships of we human with the non-human world. And in Becoming Animal, you create an experience of nature, but this experience is artificial too, because you are wandering through natural parks that about what you say that they are like museums where tourists are randoming with cars and cameras, and you do also that, but you go further because you try to make the viewer experience what would be to fly with the crow we saw in the excerpt, and then you jump in the plane, which is our own but artificial crow. How did you work? And it's the first time, I think, you work with a co-director, and Emma was also a co-editor in that experience.
How did we work together?
Yeah, well, because you work always alone, and you try a more collective approach through that new feature.
Yeah. I wouldn't say that I always work alone. I'm always associated with different people in different roles, and there's a lot of collective work. But ultimately there has been a kind of solo or lonely nature to the things I've been investigating on my own. Emma was a friend from a dramatic film called Tectonic Plates, where she performed as an actor, and we made friends. That was in the early '90s, and she became a director in her own right, moving out of theater and into film. She proposed the film Becoming Animal based on the writing of David Abram that she'd come across, and thought that it would be an interesting combination to combine our sensibilities together. We didn't have a script or even the financing for the film. We only really had a beginning, and that was to go to Grand Teton Park and meet and develop an exchange around ideas and around how the sensibility of cinema could embrace some of the explorations of David. So that's how the project started.
But in that project, you put your own practice, we could say, in crisis, because David is criticizes the overuse, I would say, of technology, and the fact that our mediated experiences through cameras, through all of different devices, prevent us to be just in connection in a more deeper way with our environment and natural life.
Yeah, and that's something I share, and Emma shares too, is the paradox of our recording mediums, and how on the one hand they can show us things and take us deeper into observations, even senses of other creatures, but on the other hand they are just a medium, and often that medium stands in the way, as language does. I mean, that's what David talks about a lot, is how language stands in the way of actually perceiving or embracing with all your senses the thing that you're looking at. You see a tree and you think, tree, that's a tree, as opposed to really taking it in with all your senses. And so, of course, using the tools of recording, audio, visual, image making, recording devices, you're faced with that same paradox all the time.
I have the impression that on one hand you're impatient because of the clouds. Most of your clouds are going in the sky quicker than normally. It's a kind of acceleration of the clouds in many situations. And in the other hand, you have this amazing patience. For instance, this bison at the beginning of the shot, the bison. He doesn't move, and you take time. You're not impatient. You have this patience. So can you tell us in what kind of psychological state, mood you have to be to find this way to enter in communication in terms of rhythm with the situations you're filming?
And if I can add something dealing with what was John saying, that's in this movie in particular, you also have the patience to film, for example, a very simple movement, trees, leaves, and the wind going through the leaves. And it's like somehow action painting or something like that. So there is a connection between the natural, vibrant life and you as a human and as an artist also.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I don't know if I'm patient or impatient, really. It's really just a matter of looking at things, and I think when you look at some things longer, you see them differently. Like the time frame changes. when you time lapse certain things, when you speed them up, you also see different things. I mean, I think that our frame of mind is like our entire ecosystem. You know, it lives in a very narrow survival ecology, let's say, and it's the same with our perception of time and change. You know, if you look at something in time lapse, you notice a lot of change that you don't notice if you look at it in real time. So it's really just about tweaking observation to make you notice things that you don't notice in the normal mode. I don't know if it really has to do with patience and impatience. It's more to do with seeing change through different frameworks of beginnings and ends. Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitively. But maybe I can give you a question regarding what we call physicality and technology. Felix Lamarche would like to know, in regard to the subject of physicality and technology, or the virtual and the machine, I would be interested to know how you approach your camera work, which is in a way very physical. We often feel and sense that there's a body behind the camera operating in, and it strikes me how it is in contrast with all this actual trend of very slick and smooth shots made with drone cameras, gimbals, or stabilizing technology.
Yeah, I mean, I think Becoming Animals a good example of the camera and the sound being an extension of our human senses. And I like to consider those tools as extensions of our senses. And I think you can find that often, and it's especially noted in Becoming Animal, where you feel the animal behind the camera, the human animal, and you know, using this machine that's created by the collective of the human animal as a process of self-reflection and understanding and exploration. I mean, I find that quality of our technologies of perception to be very exciting. Also, obviously, the way science uses technologies to see things that are invisible to us normally. I think we can use film cameras, video cameras, in a way that lets us see into our own sensibility more deeply by recognizing the gestures and the impulses that we have while we're filming.
By the way, you fly again in this film with the crow. How have you done this shot with the crow? It's of course a faked crow. It's fiction.
No, it's a real crow.
Really?
It's not a fake crow. That's a real crow. That's a crow that's been trained to fly. It lives in Britain, and it flies with a GoPro on its back. It has a trainer and a photographer that accompany it, and it will do short flights.
Right, so it's a specific program crow to make short flights.
Well, I mean, I don't think it wants to fly that long with a camera on its back is the thing. But yeah, it's trained basically to do that.
And I think we have to move to the next excerpt.
Yes, but just before, I would like to ask you one more question coming from the audience, which seems to me interesting. Bijoy Philippe wants to know what relationships you envision between the history of landscape and human history in your films, and maybe Becoming Animal can be a part of that a part of an answer possible to that question.
Sorry, can you say that again?
Yeah. What is what relationship do you envision between the history of landscape and human history in your films? That's a question from Bijoy Philippe in the audience, coming from the audience.
All right. History of landscape as it appears in the history of films.
Sorry, in your films. Films. For example, Becoming Animal. Or we could also think about Picture of Light, which is also a movie about a landscape you are trying to catch, to experience through filmmaking.
Yeah, sorry, I'm still not getting the question. What about the history of landscape?
Do you envision a history of landscape and a history of humans? You intertwine, or you intervene, you waving.
Well, I'm not sure if I'm addressing the question properly, but of course, there's a constant visibility of human traces upon our landscape in all sorts of ways. There's very little left on the planet that is, nature as it was before human interaction and human manipulation affected it. So I think wherever we look, there are these traces of our affecting the earth that we see, that the traces are there.
We also think about that sequence in The End of Time in the Detroit theater, or when with your voiceover, you describe what was that space through human history, very recent human history, with the 4T production, and then it became a theater. And
yeah. I mean, it's interesting to see traces, and also to realize that most of the traces we see are very recent. It's hard to go back centuries or millennia to see traces that far back. Really, what we're seeing are the last decades, or at best, couple of centuries.
The way you in Becoming Animal, it's really you put all your energy to make links which are possible and at the same time impossible between human nature and the nature, the original nature, and we feel that in your editing as well, and including the very technical basic questions of a car with this system of parking you included now in the new cars. So is it I never felt in your films this dimension of nostalgia, but you're looking for something which seems to be at the end unreachable.
What is it that I'm looking for that's unreachable?
This kind of fusion between humankind, human persons, you and me, you and us, and this feeling of the nature as it was at the very beginning, before the interventions of the man.
Yeah, I don't think we can get back to that if that's what you mean. I think we're in a constant kind of process of moving forwards, but finding a balance of how we can maintain our own survival, especially in respect to the environment that we live in, that feeds us, and to develop reestablish our kinship with the rest of living life on the planet. I mean, we've become very conceptual, very technical, and in many ways very cut off from the natural forces that have been sustaining us.
Maybe the challenge, and it works for me, is that you filming, editing becoming animal, you make out of the nature abstract landscape. And because of this abstract landscape, we might, as spectators, come back to the nature as nature.
Yeah, that's an interesting thing. I mean, you could say the abstract landscape is filmmaking. You could say that this whole process of mediating our experience first takes us away from the real world, but in the process of mediation reconnects us to the real world. Maybe that is a stage of evolution that all this technology is going to give us, a kind of awareness and a reconnection with the very elements that gave birth to the technology in the first place. That would be nice.
Yes, we could speak about that longer, but I think, and that's a very interesting paradox in your work, that because of your way to conceive your films, your images, to use all these tricks, because of all that, we are able to find kind of new roots in our daily fantasies, dreams, and lives, and walks in the nature.
Yeah, I mean, it's a funny thing. Me being born when I was born and being exposed to filmmaking as a young adult, it became my my exploratory technology to understand what it means to be alive. I use this technology in a paradoxical way to explore very biological things, to what it means to be in the present, what it means to be taken out of the present by the same technology. And it's a very specific time of our evolution, I think, where we have this ability to self-reflect with these technologies and discover our relationship back to the natural world that gave birth to the whole thing.
Emmanuel?
Yep. As time is flying, I was proposing, because the conversation is really passionate, maybe to jump directly to the very last part of your work as a filmmaker for the 20 last minutes of that masterclass project called Greener Grass, that we will talk about all together to end and to reopen and end this masterclass of today with Peter Mettler. So Titouan, if you can.
Why is the grass always greener on the other side?
The grass is always greener, kind of has a little bit of an element of not happy with what you have here, and you're coveting something different. And I don't think that captures the spirit of why we do things. It's not because the grass is greener over there, it's because we want to know what's out there. We want to explore.
I didn't want to live like everybody else, like the multitudes. That just never interested me. So this kind of life suits me just fine.
Why am I not happy with what I have?
Why can't I stay in one place?
This term, this word, electronic brain instead of a computer. Let's go upstairs to explore. Every human being is only a weak and fragile straw thrown into the space, which one can be broken and torn into the pieces by every blast of the wind. But it's superior to the process of the nature because it's gifted with the soul and the ability to think rationally.
Yeah. So what do you want to buy? I need more.
I need other.
You know, when you think about it, they cut down huge forests and old growth trees and everything to build these houses, and then now we waste them. So it was almost like a double strike against the environment.
I think if we found anywhere in the solar system signs of prebiotic chemistry, so signs of pre-life, that would be a big revolution. That would just that would be phenomenal.
I need to see what is around that corner.
I need to know.
On y est, je crois. On est à nouveau en ligne. So, Peter, we just saw what we call a teaser for your next project called The Greener Grass, which is also a new step in your work, because you want to work about, that you will talk about that new project, but the way you envision that project would be a serial on internet, and a film also, a multimedia, so with different layers that you are engaged to do, with also two new collaborators, I think. Stéphanie Barbet from you made the cinematography for The Broken Land, I think, in 2014, and another young woman, Mexican, who is currently working on the website, on the web design works.
Well, actually, I mean, I think there's many different people that will be involved in this project. It's something that's been brewing for a few years, and it's a very diaristic approach that will basically continue in a chronological way, and I think I would like to see it grow where more people will be involved, possibly doing different episodes themselves of different parts of it. But essentially, it's called The Greener Grass, referencing this idea that the grass is always greener on the other side, and what that can mean to different people in very different walks of life and in different cultures. And I've been filming it already with a number of different people over the course of the last year. And we have a kind of rough assembly of maybe 6 or 7 episodes at this point.
And why the greener grass? I mean, that's the main question, the main issue. And this issue has kind of big interest for many persons. The greener grass. It's the garden next to your house. It's a few months ago Cuba. It's tomorrow I don't know where, somewhere. Greener grass.
I mean, it's basically a conceptual vessel that I think allows you to go in a lot of different directions. It's part of human nature to want to look for the better place, the greener grass. It's also a big motivating factor in terms of what drives us forwards. It's what makes us explore. It's really a kind of vessel to explore the expansion of the human psyche, of human endeavor, of jealousy, of war. It's a quite all-encompassing vessel. But what's important is that it's also a diary, and it's about, as Gambling Gods and LSD was, it's about seeing things in comparison to other things, and understanding their nature, in part because of what they are compared to.
Is it going to be a collective work, or are you going to be the boss of it? Will you have the final cut of it?
Well, I think it depends how it grows. At this point, I've basically been starting it with very little money, with a little bit of private financing. There's no commercial entities involved in it at this point. So it's very much like a diary at this stage. But I would like to see it expand into a series where more filmmakers could be involved, and the exploration could branch out, and then it would become a series of episodes that different people are participating in, but all kind of reflecting upon the theme. And I would, at least in the early stages, be the kind of mediator of that material as it grows. That's the idea.
Could you mention one example of your greener grass? Where have you found till now a greener grass?
Where have I personally found greener grass?
Yes, I mean, in the frame of one of these episodes, maybe.
Well, I just had an experience at the film school in Cuba, which was with you actually, where we worked with students for 3 weeks, and proposed this very idea, what the greener grass means to different people, and I found it to be an incredible opening experience to see the receptivity of the students there, and what they gave back in terms of pondering that topic. And that's all been making its way into the edit that I'm currently working on.
And you were talking about some kind of appeal to other filmmakers to be involved in that new project. You published on the dedicated pages on the website of your atelier workshop, Peter Mettler, an appeal to filmmakers to contribute to that project, the greener grass, but in relation with the current crisis we are all going through.
Yes. I'm curious to see what people are experiencing in this stage, like what it does to their perception of the immediate environment around them as we are enclosed in this kind of social distancing, reality. And I've found for myself, I've become very appreciative of very minor nuances and details of things that I see in the passing of the days. The slightly different position of the sun every day. I can see the slightly different amount of green on the tree as spring is burgeoning here in Toronto. The different ways that the light comes in the house like a clock, slightly differently. The sounds of the different types of birds at different types of day. All these observations that not normally allowed to have time to notice, because I'm usually going somewhere or coming back from somewhere. So it's kind of an invitation to Yeah, to observe what's happening in the place that you are, more profoundly, like to be in the present, as we have forced to have been, and take stock of what we see, what we're experiencing in that one-to-one relationship that is often missing because we're so distracted by going places and watching things and not being here in the moment.
This is interesting information for the students watching us now. To know they could apply. Of course, they could send the images as well. Of course, everybody can do that.
Mm-hmm. That's right. Yeah.
And to be clear, this information about this project is on the website of Vision du Réel, like the text you wrote, Emmanuel, about the work of Peter.
Yeah, because one of the audience was just asking online where she could find all the tenets, like the default mode off online. So I can precise that it's in the page called the infos and hotline infos on the main page access of Vision du Réel website. And all the catalogs and program are available here. So you would find many different things around the work of Peter Mettler, the current work and the past work in that dedicated catalog.
And now it's always difficult to find the last words of in this case, this conversation. And the last word is yours, Peter. So please be quiet. Do something. Say something.
I have the last word. Why do I have the last word? I had to answer all the questions.
But my one possible question, I guess Emmanuel has got also one. But do you have like I heard that by many photographers and filmmakers, they missed the image, the shots they would have shot. Did you live with this memory of an image, a situation, one moment you missed?
You know, I mean, those missed moments happen all the time, but they don't bother me because the moments that are recorded are just as poignant and wonderful, and often it's moments that are not even that spectacular or that oh, you got that. It's just the ability to see through time in that way with a recorded image, I think, is magnificent, regardless of the moment that you're catching. So I don't really have that feeling, oh, I missed that. And if I missed it, it's because I didn't get it. So big deal. I have many other things that I have gotten and feel good about what that allows me to reflect upon.
And I will have one little question. Would you, when the situation will enable it, go outside and walk in a forest without your equipment?
Mm-hmm. Without my equipment is the question, is the key to that question. You know, I think my future will be one day walking with and one day walking without. And maybe my distant future will be walking without more often. But I still find that, you know, making images, recording sounds, processing that, that material is a way that I have come to discover the world and to have realizations about what it means to be in the world. So I don't think that's going to go away entirely very soon.
Peter, many thanks for these 3 hours we spent together and with the followers on the net. And it's not finished, because now we should have a drink together and to dance together, and we might dance together.
We don't know if we will dance, but I would like the audience remind the audience that we have another appointment with Peter Mettler for a live show that will begin around not around, because we are in Switzerland, in quotes, at 10 p.m. There will be a short introduction made by Jean and me and Peter about his other practice that he is going through for a long time ago, after finishing Gambling, Gods and LSD in 2002. That is to say, mixing and VJing. And save the time of today. This is not the end for Peter Mettler, and the invitation he responded for the festival. And I would like also definitively to thanks again all the team involved, committed to the success of all these masterclasses in a technical and also a very clever way. Thank you again, everybody. And see you later, 10 p.m.
Yes, thank you very much, everybody, for doing this. It was a strange pleasure to not be in the same room, but to try to be catching ideas like this. And thanks to everyone at Vision du Réel for pulling it together in very limited amount of time. And thanks.
Okay, see you later then.
See you.
Live.
Thank you.
Okay.
Merci beaucoup.
Bye bye.